My name is Diane Whitmore. I am 68 years old, a widow, and I live quietly in Portland, Oregon. For most of my life, I was a wife, a mother, and a bookkeeper at a small hardware store. I thought the hardest part of my story ended when I buried my husband Harold. But I was wrong. The real test began the week after my son's wedding. That morning I opened the front door to find my new daughter-in-law, Vanessa, standing there with a man I had never seen before. He was carrying a leather briefcase. She was carrying a smile that did not reach her eyes. Before I could even ask what this was about, he stepped into my kitchen and placed a thick folder on the table. Across the top of the first page in bold letters were the words, "Power of Attorney." Vanessa leaned forward, as though this were nothing more than a neighborly visit. Her voice was sweet, practiced. "We just want you to be safe, Mom. We want to protect you." I sat down slowly. I did not touch the folder. Instead, I looked at the steam curling up from my teacup. My silence must have unnerved them, but they did not know that silence had always been my strongest weapon. Inside my head, one truth roared louder than any words I could have spoken. $53 million. That is what Harold left me when he died. Money earned over decades of sacrifice of living below our means of saying no when others said yes. A fortune I had never mentioned, not even to our son. Before his last breath, Harold had pressed my hand and whispered, "Do not tell them. Not yet. One day you will understand why." Now staring at Vanessa's polished nails, tapping the folder, I understood exactly why this was the day he had prepared me for. I wanted to laugh, but instead I let the moment hang heavy like a curtain between us. My son's wife thought she was guiding me gently into a cage, locking the door with legal language I could never undo. But she underestimated the quiet strength of a woman who had been dismissed too many times, who had learned that sometimes you win not by shouting, but by waiting. And as I watched the lawyer clear his throat, I felt something shift inside me. The wedding reception only days earlier came flooding back. The band had been playing, glasses clinked. My son Daniel danced with his bride beneath chandeliers and roses. Where was I? At table 14 behind a column of flowers, my view of the dance floor blocked as though my presence did not matter. I had smiled politely, but in truth I was hidden in plain sight. That was the night I stayed silent about my inheritance, and thank God I did. Because if I had spoken, if I had shared that truth, then by the time I opened this door, I would already have nothing left. This is where my story begins. The day I realized that silence had saved me. The day my daughter-in-law arrived with a lawyer at my door, expecting me to surrender everything. The attorney placed his business card beside the folder. Andrew Pike, Estate Planning and Elder Law. He cleared his throat again, a practiced sound meant to command attention. "Mrs. Whitmore, these documents are standard protections for someone in your position. They simply authorize Daniel and Vanessa to assist with financial decisions should the need arise. It's quite routine." Vanessa nodded her earrings, catching the morning light. "We worry about you being alone, especially after seeing how tired you were at the wedding. This is just insurance." Tired. The word hung in the air, not quite an insult, but close enough to feel its sting. I had not been tired at the wedding. I had been invisible. The kettle on the stove began to whistle a high, thin sound that cut through their practiced speeches. I stood slowly, my knees complaining as they often do in the mornings, and walked to the stove. I felt their eyes on my back, assessing my movements, perhaps looking for a tremor or hesitation they could catalog as evidence. I poured water into the teapot, watching the leaves bloom and darken. My mother's teapot, white porcelain with blue flowers worn thin at the spout from decades of morning rituals. I returned to the table carrying the pot and 2 additional cups on a wooden tray Harold had made when we were first married. "Would you care for some tea?" My voice sounded exactly as it always had, steady, perhaps a touch soft, the voice of a woman who has spent a lifetime being underheard. Andrew looked at his watch. "Actually, we're on a bit of a schedule. Perhaps we could just review the documents." I poured tea into each cup, ignoring his impatience. "I find that important decisions are best made without haste. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Pike?" He shifted in his chair, the first crack in his professional veneer. Vanessa reached for her cup but didn't drink, her red fingernails making a small clicking sound against the porcelain. Of course these decisions shouldn't be rushed. Vanessa smiled again, warmer this time, but just as rehearsed. But we also don't want to leave you vulnerable. These documents will ensure that if anything happens, a fall and illness, Daniel and I can immediately step in to help. No delays, no complications. I sipped my tea and let the silence stretch. Through the kitchen window, I could see the rose garden Harold had planted after his father died. He always said grief needs something to tend. The rose canes leaned against the simple wooden fence he had mended each spring, his plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled up, a pencil tucked behind his ear. "Mr. Pike, have you reviewed my current arrangements?" I kept my voice light, conversational. "Current arrangements." He glanced at Vanessa, who gave the slightest shake of her head. "Yes, the documents Harold and I established before his passing. I would think you'd want to review those before suggesting replacements." Andrew cleared his throat again. "Mrs. Whitmore, often older documents aren't as comprehensive as what we're proposing. Legal standards evolve, and frankly, many spouses don't fully include their wives in financial planning." The condescension in his tone was so familiar, it almost felt like an old friend. I had heard it at bank counters, at car dealerships, at the hardware store, when men would ask to speak to someone who really knew tools, despite my 20 years managing inventory. "I see," I said simply, and returned to my tea. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "Mom, I know this might seem sudden, but Daniel is really worried. He doesn't sleep well thinking about you alone in this big house. This would give us all peace of mind." Peace of mind. As if my autonomy were merely an inconvenience to my son's sleep schedule. I thought of the wedding reception again, of how carefully Vanessa's mother Marjorie had orchestrated every detail. How she had hugged Daniel, pressing her cheek to his, her eyes scanning the room like a curator, ensuring every element was perfectly placed. And how she had seated me at table 14 behind a column of flowers, a placeholder required for completeness, but not meant to be seen. "The night certainly was beautiful," I said, changing the subject. "The flowers were exceptional." Vanessa's smile faltered slightly, uncertain of my direction. "Yes, Mom picked the florist herself. Those centerpieces were hand-designed." "They certainly made an impression. I could hardly see past them from table 14. The words hung in the air between us. Vanessa's smile tightened at the corners. Andrew shifted again, sensing a current in the conversation he wasn't equipped to navigate. "About these documents." He tried again, tapping the folder. "We could have a notary here this afternoon. It would take less than 30 minutes of your time." Today. They wanted this done today, as if tomorrow might bring some catastrophic change of circumstance, as if I might wake up tomorrow with too many questions or too much clarity. "I'm afraid I have plans this afternoon," I said, though my calendar held nothing but the routine that had structured my days since Harold's passing. "And I never sign documents I haven't read thoroughly." "Of course," Vanessa nodded quickly. "We can leave these with you to review." Andrew looked less pleased with this development. "Mrs. Whitmore, it would really be best if we could finalize this today. I've seen too many families struggle with delays in these matters." I folded my hands in my lap, feeling the thin gold band Harold had placed on my finger 40 years earlier. It needed cleaning, but I couldn't bear to take it off. "Mr. Pike, I appreciate your concern, but I've managed this household and our finances since Harold became ill 3 years ago. I believe I can manage to review legal documents without supervision." For the first time, a flash of annoyance crossed Vanessa's face. It vanished quickly, replaced by concern so practiced it might have been rehearsed in a mirror. "No one is questioning your abilities, Mom. This is about making things easier, not harder." But I had seen it, that brief moment when the mask slipped. In that instant, I understood why Harold had kept our finances so private, why he had pressed that key into my palm on his deathbed with such urgency. He had seen something in Daniel's choice of partner that concerned him. Not evil, perhaps, but hunger, ambition that might easily become entitlement. Andrew checked his watch again. "Perhaps I could return tomorrow, say around 10. I'll need to consult my own attorney first." I said, the decision forming even as the words left my mouth. "I believe in second opinions, Mr. Pike." "Your attorney?" Vanessa's voice lifted slightly in surprise. "Yes, Carl Jensen. He handled Harold's affairs and continues to handle mine. This was true, though I hadn't spoken to Carl in nearly a year. The last time was when he'd helped me file Harold's final tax return. Andrew's demeanor shifted subtly, a lawyer recognizing another lawyer's territory. "Of course, that's perfectly reasonable. Perhaps you could have Mr. Jensen contact my office directly." I nodded, feeling a small victory in the retreat. Vanessa's fingers had stopped tapping. Instead, they curled around her untouched teacup, squeezing a little too tightly. "We really just want what's best for you," she said, but the sweetness in her voice had thinned, stretched over something harder beneath. "I know, dear, and I want what's best for all of us." After they left, I stood at the kitchen window watching their car back out of the driveway. Vanessa was already on her phone, gesturing with her free hand as she spoke. I could imagine the conversation, reporting the delay, strategizing the next approach. The house settled around me creaking, as old houses do when the day warms. It was our only home purchased when we were in our 20s. We could have moved to something newer, something with fewer drafts and more modern amenities, especially in the last decade as Harold's business investments matured. But Harold believed in roots, in staying where memories lived in the walls. I walked through the living room, running my fingers along the bookshelf Harold had built when Daniel was born, the dining room table where we'd celebrated 40 Christmases, the stairs that still held the sound of a little boy's footsteps running down on Saturday mornings. In the bedroom, I opened the closet and stood looking at Harold's clothes that I still couldn't bear to give away. His plaid shirts hung in a neat row, the elbows worn thin on his favorites. I touched the sleeve of the one he'd worn most often when working in the yard, blue and green, with a small tear on the cuff that I'd mended twice. I slipped the shirt from its hanger and held it to my face. If I closed my eyes, I could almost catch the scent of him still, cedar and soap and the light cologne he wore only on Sundays. The fabric felt like the map of our marriage, sturdy, practical, softened by years of wear and washing. "What do I do now, Harold?" I whispered to the empty room. "They think I'm a dotty old woman they can manage out of the way." The room offered no answer beyond the quiet ticking of the alarm clock on the nightstand, but somewhere in my memory I heard Harold's voice, as clearly as if he were standing beside me. "Trust your instincts, Diane. You've always seen people more clearly than I have." I folded the shirt carefully and set it on the bed. Then I walked to the basement door, flipping the light switch as I descended the wooden stairs. The basement smelled of laundry detergent and the faint mustiness that persists in Portland homes, no matter how well maintained. Harold's workbench stood against the far wall, his tools still arranged in the precise order he preferred. Behind the pegboard where he hung his wrenches and screwdrivers, there was a panel that looked like part of the wall. Unless you knew to look for it, you'd never notice the seam where it could be removed. I slid the panel aside, revealing a small safe bolted to the wall studs. The key Harold had given me was on my keychain. I still carried it everywhere, though, until now I'd only opened the safe once the day after his funeral, when I'd first discovered what he'd left me. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and the door swung open. Inside were several accordion files organized with the meticulous care Harold brought to everything he touched. On top lay a blue folder. I lifted it out and opened it again, though I knew its contents by heart. "My dearest Diane, if you're reading this, I'm not beside you to explain. I've prepared what I could, and the rest is your judgment. Call Carl Jensen. The number is on the card attached. He has all the documents and will guide you through whatever comes next. This is armor, not bragging. The statements and trust documents in the green folder amount to $53 million held in your name alone. Everything is structured to protect you, even from those who might claim to have your best interests at heart. I've never been one for speeches, but I need you to understand something important. Money doesn't make a person worthy of respect, but it does make them a target. We've lived simply because we value simplicity, not because we had to. That choice has protected us from people who would be drawn to wealth rather than worth. Daniel doesn't know. I've struggled with this decision, but I believe it's right. Let him make his way, establish his life and marriage without the distortion wealth can bring. When the time is right, you'll know what to do. If you say nothing, you will see who speaks for you. With all my love." Harold, I traced his signature with my finger, feeling the slight pressure indentations in the paper. Harold had never been demonstrative, never one for grand gestures. His love showed in the careful maintenance of our home, in remembering how I took my tea in planning so thoroughly for a future he wouldn't share. The green folder contained statements from investment accounts, property deeds for commercial real estate I'd never seen, and stock certificates. Our modest lifestyle had been a choice, not a necessity. Every sacrifice, every careful decision had been an investment building toward this hidden fortune. The most important document was the trust agreement notarized and stamped with official seals. Harold had created an irrevocable trust with me as the sole beneficiary and trustee. No one, not Daniel, not Vanessa, not any court, could access these assets without my explicit consent. If anyone attempted to claim power of attorney without medical proof of my incapacity, the assets would be locked down even further under a secondary trustee, Carl Jensen himself. I returned the documents to the safe, closed it, and slid the panel back into place. The weight of the knowledge settled over me like a cloak, both protection and burden. Upstairs, I picked up the phone and dialed Carl Jensen's number. His secretary put me through immediately. "Diane, it's been too long. How are you holding up?" Carl's voice brought immediate comfort. He'd been Harold's friend since college before becoming our attorney. "I need your help, Carl. It seems my son and his new wife are concerned about my ability to manage my own affairs." I explained the morning's visit, the power of attorney documents, the rush to have them signed. Carl's silence on the other end told me he understood exactly what was happening. "I'll be there in an hour," he said finally. "Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. And Diane, you were right to call." After hanging up, I made a fresh pot of tea and carried it to the back porch. The garden needed attention. Weeds were sprouting between the roses, and the lawn could use mowing. Harold would have been out there already taming the growth that accelerated in Portland's mild spring. My neighbor Clara was in her yard deadheading her hydrangeas. When she saw me, she waved and walked over to the fence that separated our properties. "Missed you at the garden club yesterday," she said, leaning on her pruning shears. Clara was a few years younger than me, a retired nurse whose husband had died even before Harold. We'd formed a quiet friendship of shared widowhood. "The wedding took more out of me than I expected," I admitted. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. "I heard it was something else. All those chandeliers and roses. Marjorie Griffin has been talking about it all over town." "It was beautiful," I said diplomatically. "Where did they seat you?" Clara asked, her directness one of the qualities I most appreciated about her. "Table 14, behind the flowers." Clara's mouth tightened. "Behind the flowers, you, the mother of the groom." I nodded, sipping my tea. "That Marjorie," Clara shook her head, "always has to be the center of everything, and that daughter of hers seems cut from the same cloth." I said nothing, but Clara had known me long enough to read the confirmation in my silence. "Had visitors this morning," she said, changing the subject, but not really. "That new daughter-in-law of yours and some man in a suit. Looked very serious." Of course Clara had noticed. Nothing happened on our street without her knowing. "They're concerned about me living alone," I said carefully. "Concerned my foot." Clara snorted. "Been living alone just fine for how many years now?" 3 since Harold passed. I don't see you forgetting to water your plants or wandering the neighborhood in your bathrobe." I smiled despite myself. "They brought power of attorney documents, wanted me to sign today." Clara's eyebrows shot up. "Power of attorney. They don't waste any time, do they?" "Carl Jensen is coming over to help me sort it out." "Good." Clara nodded firmly. "Never sign anything without your own lawyer present. That's what Jack always said." Jack had been Clara's husband, a judge before his retirement. "You want me to come over, be another set of eyes?" "I'd appreciate that," I said, realizing how much I wanted someone else in my corner. "Carl should be here in about an hour." Clara nodded. "I'll finish with these hydrangeas and come over. And Diane," her voice softened, "you're not alone in this. Remember that." As she returned to her flowers, I felt a small easing of the tightness in my chest. Clara was right. I wasn't alone. I had resources I hadn't even begun to tap. Not just financial ones, but the community I'd built over decades in this neighborhood. People who knew me, who had watched Daniel grow up, who could attest to my competence and clarity if it ever came to that. I returned to the kitchen and opened the folder Vanessa and Andrew had left. The documents were extensive, not just power of attorney for financial decisions, but healthcare proxy authorization to access all financial accounts and permission to make housing decisions on my behalf. It was, as Andrew had claimed, comprehensively designed to remove every vestige of my autonomy. The doorbell rang just as I was finishing my review. Carl stood on the porch, briefcase in hand, looking much as he had at Harold's funeral. Solid, reliable, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Let me see what they're trying to pull," he said without preamble, following me to the kitchen. He reviewed the documents quickly, his frown deepening with each page. "This is aggressive, Diane. This isn't standard elder care planning. This is a complete transfer of control." I nodded, having reached the same conclusion. "Do they know about the trust, about the assets?" Carl asked, glancing up. "No. Harold was adamant about keeping it quiet, and now I understand why." "Smart man, Harold, always thinking 3 steps ahead." Carl closed the folder and set it aside. "Here's what we're going to do." The doorbell rang again before he could continue. Clara stood on the porch, a plate of cookies in hand, her excuse for visiting. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she said as I introduced her to Carl. "Not at all." Carl smiled. In fact, having a witness to our conversation might be very helpful. We sat at the kitchen table, Clara's cookies untouched in the center, as Carl outlined a strategy. First, secure all accounts with additional verification measures. Second, record a legal statement asserting my current competence with Clara as witness. Third, prepare a comprehensive response to the power of attorney request. "We'll schedule a meeting with all parties present, you, me, Daniel, Vanessa, and their attorney," Carl explained. "Everything above board, everything documented. If their intentions are genuinely about your care, they'll have no objections." As Carl spoke, I felt the initial shock and hurt begin to transform into something else. Not anger exactly, but resolve. A determination to protect not just the assets Harold had built, but the dignity he had always afforded me as a partner, not a dependent. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted our planning. Through the window, I saw Daniel's sedan pull up. He was alone. "That's my son," I said, standing. "I should speak with him." "Do you want us to stay?" Clara asked, her hand moving to cover mine briefly. "No, I think this conversation needs to be between mother and son." I straightened my cardigan, smoothed my hair. "But thank you both for being here." Carl gathered his notes. "I'll call this afternoon with the names of those notaries. Remember, no signatures without me present." After they left through the side door, I took a moment to collect myself. Then I opened the front door just as Daniel was about to knock. He looked startled to find me waiting, as if he'd expected to need to announce himself. He was a handsome young man with Harold's height, and my eyes dressed in the business casual attire his job at an accounting firm required. But today, there was something different about him. A tension in his shoulders, a reluctance to meet my gaze. "Mom." He started, his voice a little too bright. "I hope this isn't a bad time." "It's never a bad time for you, Daniel. Come in." He followed me to the kitchen, his eyes immediately falling on the folder still open on the table. "Ah, I see Vanessa and Andrew already stopped by." His voice held a note of relief, as if a difficult topic had been broached without his having to introduce it. "Yes, they were here this morning, very eager to have me sign those documents today." Daniel sat at the table, fidgeting with his keys, turning them over in his hand, a nervous habit he'd had since high school. "Mom, I know it might seem sudden, but Vanessa and I have been talking about this for a while. After the wedding, seeing how tired you were, we just want to make sure you're protected." There was that word again, tired, a word being used to diminish me, to reshape the narrative of who I was. "I wasn't tired, Daniel. I was seated behind a floral arrangement that blocked my view of my only son's first dance at his wedding." His eyes flickered up, then back to his keys. "The seating was complicated. Marjorie had a system." "I'm sure she did." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "About the documents. It would really help if you could sign them soon. It's just precautionary. Nothing would change in your day-to-day life." "Everything would change," I said quietly. Those documents give you and Vanessa complete control over my finances, my health care, and my housing. That's not a precaution. That's a surrender. Mom, that's not... Why the rush? Daniel, what crisis are we trying to prevent today? That wasn't a concern last week or last month. He twisted the keys harder, metal digging into his palm. Vanessa thinks... We think it's better to have these things in order before they're needed. You know, planning ahead. I've already planned ahead. Harold and I made arrangements years ago. Carl Jensen has all the documentation. At the mention of Carl's name, Daniel's expression changed. You called Carl Vanessa, said we should use Andrew because he specializes in elder law. Carl Jensen has been our family attorney for 30 years. Of course I called him. Daniel looked genuinely confused, as if he hadn't considered that I might have my own legal representation, my own voice in this matter. Does Vanessa know you're here? I asked gently. His silence was answer enough. Daniel, look at me. Reluctantly, he raised his eyes to mine. In them I saw conflict, the desire to please his new wife warring with the knowledge that what they were asking wasn't right. Do you truly believe I need these documents now, or are you trying to avoid a difficult conversation at home? The question hung between us, honest and unavoidable. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. He set the keys on the table with deliberate care. She says if you don't sign it, means you don't trust us, that you're being stubborn out of spite. And what do you think? He didn't answer immediately, and in that hesitation, I saw how thoroughly Vanessa had come to dominate his thinking. My son, who had once been so confident in his judgments, now looked to another to tell him what to believe. I think... He started, then faltered. I think things would be easier if you just signed. Easier for whom? Again, no answer. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. Daniel, I love you. That hasn't changed and won't change. But I need you to understand something very important. I am not signing those documents today. I am not surrendering my autonomy to make your life more convenient or your wife less anxious. He withdrew his hand slowly. She'll be upset. That's between you and her. My decision is between me and my conscience. Daniel stood retrieving his keys. I should go. Vanessa is expecting me back. Before you leave, I want you to know that Carl and I will be scheduling a meeting, all of us together, you, Vanessa, Andrew, Carl, and me. We'll discuss what protections might actually be appropriate at this stage of my life. He nodded, not meeting my eyes again. At the door, he paused. I just want everyone to get along. I know, but peace built on surrender isn't peace at all. After he left, I returned to the kitchen and sat heavily at the table. The confrontation, gentle as it had been, had drained me. I could see now what Harold had feared. Not that Daniel would intentionally harm me, but that he lacked the strength to stand against someone who might. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was Carl. I've arranged for a notary to come tomorrow morning. We'll document your current state and your explicit rejection of the proposed power of attorney. Then we'll schedule that meeting for later in the week. Thank you, Carl. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd manage Diane. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Harold knew that, even if you sometimes forget. After we hung up, I walked through the quiet house, touching familiar objects as if to reassure myself of their solidity. The clock Harold had fixed countless times, the quilt my mother had made for our wedding, the photographs chronicling our life together, Daniel's first day of school, our silver anniversary trip to the Coast Herald in his garden. In the bedroom, his plaid shirt still lay on the bed where I'd left it. I picked it up and held it close, breathing in the faint remnants of his presence. You were right, I whispered. You were right about everything. As evening fell, I made a simple dinner and ate it on the back porch, watching the light fade from Harold's garden. The roses needed pruning, the fence needed mending, but they had survived another winter. They would bloom again because that's what sturdy things do when they're rooted well. I thought about the meeting to come about, facing Vanessa and Andrew with my own counsel present. I thought about the look in Daniel's eyes when he realized I wouldn't simply acquiesce. I thought about the $53 million Harold had left in my care and how little Vanessa and Daniel suspected the true stakes of this power play. The brass key felt heavy in my pocket, a small weight carrying the full measure of Harold's foresight. I had always been the quiet one, the steady presence behind Harold's more visible strength. But he had known, perhaps better than I did myself, that quietness is not weakness, that steadiness is not passivity. The night air carried the scent of earth and new growth of life, continuing its patient cycle. I finished my tea as darkness settled completely, then went inside to call Clara and confirm our plan for the notary's visit tomorrow. As I prepared for bed, I placed Harold's shirt on the pillow beside mine. Not as a substitute for his presence, but as a reminder of his wisdom. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own decisions. But tonight, I understood more clearly than ever why silence had been my salvation. Why Harold's secret had been an act not of deception, but of love. In the quiet of the bedroom, I whispered a promise to myself and to Harold's memory. I will hold the line. I will speak in complete sentences. I will not rush to fill silences that serve me. I will remember that I am not invisible, even when others wish me to be. The house creaked and settled around me solid, despite its age sturdy, despite its imperfections, like me. And in that moment, I knew with complete certainty that I would prevail, not through confrontation or ultimatums, but through the quiet, immovable strength that comes from knowing exactly where you stand and what you're worth. The morning air held a rare Portland crispness as Carl Jensen's silver sedan pulled into my driveway. The notary, a small woman named Elma with rectangular glasses and efficient movements, followed in her own car. I watched them from the kitchen window, a fresh pot of tea already steeped on the counter, 3 cups arranged on Harold's tray. Through the screen door, I could see Clara trimming her roses secateurs flashing in the morning light. She glanced up at Carl's arrival, gave a small wave, and set her tools down. We had agreed she would join us as a witness, another pair of eyes to document this moment. Carl's voice carried as he greeted Elma on the walkway. "Beautiful morning to document a woman's right to manage her own life, wouldn't you say?" Elma's laugh was brief but genuine. "In 30 years as a notary, I've stamped more power of attorney documents than I can count. It's refreshing to be sealing their rejection instead." I opened the door before they reached it, a small gesture of control in what had become an unexpected battlefield. "Diane," Carl clasped my hand warmly. "Hope we're not too early." "The tea's just ready," I said, gesturing them inside as Clara crossed the lawn to join us. We gathered in the dining room rather than the kitchen, the space feeling more formal, more appropriate for the documents Carl spread across the polished surface of the table Harold and I had purchased for our 10th anniversary. The morning light caught the water stains and small burns that documented decades of family meals, holiday gatherings, homework sessions. The affidavit Carl had prepared was straightforward. I, Diane Whitmore, being of sound mind, explicitly rejected the power of attorney proposed by my son Daniel and his wife Vanessa. I was capable of managing my own financial and medical decisions. I had established prior legal arrangements that remained valid and sufficient. As Elma prepared her notary stamp, Clara squeezed my hand beneath the table. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered. "This is how you protect not just your assets, but your dignity." I signed where indicated my hand, steady my signature as clear as it had been on my marriage license 40 years earlier. Elma's stamp came down with a satisfying thud, the red ink blooming like a small warning flag on the page. Carl gathered the documents carefully. "I've arranged a meeting for Friday at 2 p.m. at my office. I've already spoken with Andrew Pike to confirm. He wasn't pleased, but he could hardly refuse a proper legal consultation." "Will Daniel be there?" The question caught in my throat slightly. I insisted that all parties be present. This isn't something that should happen through intermediaries. Carl's eyes softened with understanding. "Diane, are you prepared for what might be said? These situations can become emotional." I thought of Daniel's face when he'd left yesterday, the conflict evident in every line of his body. I thought of Vanessa's practiced smile, her fingernails tapping against my kitchen table with barely contained impatience. "I survived burying my husband," I said finally. "I can survive an uncomfortable meeting." After they left, Clara stayed helping me wash the teacups, her movements as familiar in my kitchen as my own. "You need to be ready for more than discomfort," she said, drying a cup with careful precision. "That girl isn't going to give up easily, not when there's something to gain." I looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, people don't push this hard this fast for nothing. They want something specific, and they want it now." "The house, maybe," I suggested. "It's not grand, but the property values in this neighborhood have increased significantly." Clara shook her head. "A house is a slow game. You don't need immediate power of attorney for real estate. You need it for liquid assets, for accounts you can access quickly." Her words settled over me with uncomfortable weight. What did Vanessa know, or think she knew, about our finances? Had Daniel shared something, some hint of Harold's success? The thought of my son betraying his father's explicit wishes sent a chill through me despite the warming day. "What should I watch for?" I asked, trusting Clara's decades of nursing experience, her sharp eye for human behavior. "Urgency," she said promptly. "Pressure disguised as concern, and watch who does the talking. If your son lets her or that lawyer speak for him, you'll know who's driving this train." The phone rang before I could respond. Daniel's number flashed on the caller ID. I answered, keeping my voice neutral, despite the sudden acceleration of my heart. "Mom, I just got a call from Andrew Pike. He says there's a meeting scheduled for Friday at Carl Jensen's office. Why wasn't I consulted about this?" The edge in his voice was new. Not anger exactly, but the brittleness of someone operating under pressure. "Carl contacted your attorney who agreed to the meeting. I assumed he would inform you." "That's not how this works. We're trying to help you not engage in some legal battle. Vanessa is upset. She thinks you're being manipulated by your neighbor." The accusation stung, not because it held any truth, but because it revealed how thoroughly Daniel had absorbed Vanessa's perspective. In his mind, I wasn't capable of independent thought or action. Any resistance must come from outside influence. "I'm not being manipulated, Daniel. I'm making choices about my own life as I have for 68 years. A long silence followed. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its edge. "I'll be at the meeting. But Mom, please try to be reasonable. This doesn't have to be adversarial." "I agree completely, which is why I expect everyone to respect my right to make my own decisions." After we hung up, Clara watched me with concern. "You all right?" "No," I admitted. "But I will be." The days until Friday stretched before me, each hour a small exercise in resolve. I went about my routine, sweeping the porch on Tuesday, deadheading the roses when the light was kind, making tea in the afternoon. But beneath these familiar rhythms, a current of determination was building, strengthened rather than diminished by Daniel's call. On Wednesday evening, Clara came by with fresh-baked scones and news that would prove valuable. "There's something you should know," she said as we settled at the kitchen table. "My friend Margaret works at the pharmacy downtown. She overheard something yesterday that might interest you." I raised an eyebrow, waiting. Vanessa and her mother were there arguing in the parking lot. Margaret couldn't hear everything, but she caught enough. Something about bounce checks, a florist demanding payment, student loans coming due. And your name, Diane. She distinctly heard Vanessa say your name, followed by needs to sign and consolidate debts. The information confirmed my suspicions, but hearing it still felt like a blow. Not concern for my welfare, but desperation about their finances was driving this sudden interest in managing my affairs. Margaret said the mother, Marjorie is it, looked furious, said something about champagne taste, and warned Vanessa about steering too hard, whatever that means. "It means Daniel is being guided where she wants him to go," I said quietly. "And it means I was right to call Carl." Clara nodded, her expression grim. "This isn't about eldercare, Diane. This is about a financial rescue." That night, I slept poorly, my mind replaying the conversation with Daniel, imagining Friday's meeting, wondering how deep their financial troubles might be. By Thursday morning, I felt tired but resolute. The path forward was clear, even if the journey would be painful. Friday morning dawned gray and drizzling, typical Portland spring weather that matched my mood. I dressed with unusual care, a navy dress I'd worn to Harold's retirement dinner, a cardigan that still held its shape, small pearl earrings he'd given me for our 30th anniversary. Armor of a different kind. Clara appeared at my door at 1:15, car keys in hand. "Thought you might want a friendly face for the drive." The gesture brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you." As she drove, Clara kept the conversation deliberately light. Garden plans, a new book she was reading, an amusing story about her grandson's science project. I was grateful for the distraction, for the momentary respite from the weight of the coming confrontation. Carl's office occupied the first floor of a converted craftsman house near downtown. The waiting room retained the charm of a former parlor with built-in bookcases and a bay window overlooking a small garden. Andrew Pike was already there, his briefcase resting beside him like a loyal pet. He nodded stiffly as we entered. "Mrs. Whitmore, Ms." He trailed off, looking at Clara with slight confusion. "Pearson," Clara supplied. "Just moral support. I'll wait out here." She squeezed my arm and settled into a chair with a magazine, her presence already a comfort. Daniel and Vanessa arrived moments later. My son looked strained, his normally neat appearance slightly rumpled, as if he'd been running his hands through his hair. Vanessa was immaculate in a pale blue dress, her expression composed into pleasant neutrality. Carl emerged from his office to greet us. "Thank you all for coming. Let's get started, shall we?" The conference room was warm sunlight breaking through the clouds to stream through windows that overlooked a Japanese maple. Carl had arranged the seating carefully. I was at his right, Andrew, Daniel, and Vanessa across the table. A court reporter sat unobtrusively in the corner, her fingers poised above her stenotype machine. "I've asked Ms. Reynolds to document our discussion today," Carl explained. "I find it helps prevent misunderstandings later." Andrew shifted in his chair. "That seems unnecessarily formal for a family discussion." "On the contrary," Carl's voice remained pleasant. "Given that your client presented legal documents requesting complete control over Mrs. Whitmore's finances, medical decisions, and housing arrangements, I'd say we're well beyond informal family discussion." Vanessa leaned forward, her smile practiced. "We never intended this to feel adversarial. We're concerned, that's all. After seeing Diane at the wedding, how tired she seemed, how overwhelmed, we wanted to ensure she has support." I met her gaze directly. "I appreciate concern. What I don't appreciate is having my autonomy questioned based on a single evening where I was seated behind a floral arrangement that blocked my view of my son's wedding reception." Daniel flinched visibly. Vanessa's smile flickered but held. "Mrs. Whitmore," Andrew interjected, "these documents are standard precautionary measures. Many families establish them well before they're needed. It's simply good planning." "I've reviewed the documents you presented," Carl said, opening a folder. "They are far more extensive than standard precautionary measures. They would grant immediate and complete control over all aspects of Mrs. Whitmore's life, financial, medical, residential. There is no triggering event specified, no requirement for medical evaluation of capacity." Andrew shrugged slightly. "That's the nature of durable power of attorney. It remains in effect regardless of the principal's capacity." "Which is precisely why it's inappropriate in this situation," Carl countered. "Mrs. Whitmore has no cognitive impairment, no physical limitations that prevent her from managing her affairs. There is no legitimate reason for her to surrender her autonomy at this time." Vanessa's composure slipped slightly. "No one is asking her to surrender anything. We're offering protection." "Protection from what?" I asked quietly. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Daniel stared at his hands, avoiding my eyes. "Let me be clear," Carl continued. "Mrs. Whitmore has comprehensive legal arrangements already in place. She has a springing power of attorney that activates only if 2 independent physicians certify her incapacity. She has advanced healthcare directives on file with her doctor. Her estate planning is complete and current." "Estate planning?" Vanessa repeated, a new note of interest in her voice. "Daniel mentioned that Harold had a small life insurance policy, but we weren't aware of formal estate planning." The casual way she probed for financial information confirmed everything I had suspected. "My late husband was very thorough," I said simply. Carl slid a document across the table. "This is a summary of Mrs. Whitmore's existing legal protections. As you can see, her affairs are in excellent order. There is no gap that needs filling, no vulnerability that needs addressing." Andrew scanned the document with professional interest. Daniel barely glanced at it. Vanessa, however, studied it with intensity, her eyes lingering on certain sections. "If Mrs. Whitmore already has these protections in place, why the resistance to updating them to include her son and daughter-in-law?" Andrew asked. "Surely having family involved is preferable to relying solely on legal mechanisms." "Because Mrs. Whitmore has the right to choose who holds authority over her life," Carl responded firmly, "and she has chosen to maintain her independence until and unless medical necessity dictates otherwise." Daniel finally spoke, his voice strained. "Mom, we just want what's best for you. Is that so wrong?" I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and saw the boy who had once brought home a bird with a broken wing determined to save it. His heart had always been soft, his intentions good, but intentions weren't enough. "What's best for me is to be respected as a capable adult who can make her own decisions." I kept my voice gentle but firm. "What's best for me is not having my competence questioned based on nothing more than my age." "No one is questioning your competence," Vanessa interjected quickly. "Then why the insistence on immediate power of attorney? Why the urgency to have documents signed within 24 hours of presenting them? Why the resistance to my consulting my own attorney?" Again, silence fell across the table. In that moment, something shifted in the room's atmosphere. Daniel glanced at Vanessa, then at Andrew, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Perhaps," Carl suggested, "we should discuss why this matter has become so pressing all of a sudden." Andrew cleared his throat. "My clients are simply being proactive. There's no specific urgency beyond good planning." "Then there should be no objection to proceeding at a more measured pace," Carl replied. "Perhaps revisiting this discussion in 6 months after Mrs. Whitmore has had her annual physical. If there are any medical concerns at that time, we can address them with appropriate medical input." Vanessa's carefully maintained composure cracked. 6 months? That's not— She stopped abruptly, catching herself. "Not what Mrs. Whitmore," Carl prompted. "Not necessary to delay so long." She recovered smoothly. "But if that's what Diane prefers, of course we'll respect that." The concession came too quickly, too easily. I thought of what Clara had shared, the bounced checks, the mounting debt, the deferred student loans coming due. 6 months would be far too late for their financial emergency. "In the meantime," I said, removing a card from my purse and placing it on the table, "I've prepared this statement. I never sign documents presented without counsel. All communications regarding my legal affairs go through my attorney. Meetings are scheduled with appropriate notice. Drafts are provided 48 hours in advance." I paused, making eye contact with each person across the table. "That is my boundary. It is not up for negotiation." Vanessa's hand hovered above the card, not quite touching it. "Boundaries are wonderful. I respect yours." Her voice had taken on a slightly mechanical quality, as if reciting lines she'd rehearsed. "Respect is a two-way bridge. This would be easier if I could show trust." The word slipped out. Trust. As if it belonged to the side requesting signatures, not the one being asked to sign. I let my silence answer, feeling its weight settle across the table more effectively than any words. Daniel finally reached across the table, taking the card and reading it slowly. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted peace." "Peace is not always the same as obedience," I replied, the words emerging with a clarity that surprised even me. "True peace comes from mutual respect, not from one person surrendering to another's demands." He kept his eyes on the card, nodding slightly, as if the words on the page might forgive him where I could not. Vanessa shifted to a softer approach, her voice taking on a honeyed quality that felt calculated. "We care about family, about holidays together, about making memories. Stress fades when roles are clear. You deserve ease, Diane." I will continue to manage my house and my health as I have done for decades, I said firmly. I will ask for help when I need it. I will not sign blanket authority. And if a medical crisis ever comes, the springing documents already in place will activate. That is what Harold wanted. That is what I want now. The finality in my tone seemed to land across the table. Vanessa stood smoothing her dress with hands that trembled slightly despite her composed expression. Thank you for meeting with us. I'm sorry if we've pushed too hard. Perhaps we can revisit this when emotions aren't so high. The polite dismissal of my clearly stated boundaries as mere emotions might have angered me once. Now it simply confirmed that I had made the right decision. Daniel remained seated, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Regret, perhaps, or the dawning recognition of what he had almost done. "Are you angry with me?" he asked, as the others began gathering their things. "No," I answered truthfully. "I'm not angry. I'm careful. Careful is what kept this family whole when money was thin and days were long." He nodded slowly, placing the boundary card in his pocket. The movement seemed deliberate, a small acknowledgement of my terms. At the door, Vanessa touched my arm lightly. "I hope we can revisit this later, when things are calmer. Later belongs to people who respect today." The words came without planning a simple truth I hadn't known I held until it emerged. She attempted a laugh that faltered halfway, then gave up the pretense. They walked to their car in silence, the space between them noticeable even from a distance. Clara was waiting in the reception area, pretending to read a magazine that hadn't been turned to a new page in 30 minutes. She looked up as I emerged, her eyes questioning. "It's done," I said simply. In the car, Clara didn't immediately start the engine. Instead, she turned to me with the directness that had always defined our friendship. "Now what you've drawn your line, do you think they'll respect it?" I considered the question, remembering Vanessa's expression as she studied the summary of my legal arrangements, the barely contained frustration when Carl suggested waiting 6 months. "No," I said finally. "At least not Vanessa. She's desperate about something, and desperate people rarely respect boundaries." Clara nodded, unsurprised. "Then we need to be vigilant." What's next in Carl's plan? Securing everything, updating account protections, adding verbal passwords, recording the house deed properly with the trust as owner. She started the car, pulling carefully into traffic. "Good, and I'll keep an eye out. That girl strikes me as the type who might try an end run around legal channels." The afternoon light had softened by the time we returned to my neighborhood. As Clara pulled into my driveway, I noticed Daniel's car parked on the street a few houses down. He was alone, sitting behind the wheel, seemingly lost in thought. "Looks like someone's having second thoughts," Clara observed. "Want me to stay?" "No," I decided. "This is something I need to handle alone." She squeezed my hand before I got out. "Call if you need me. Anytime." I walked steadily to Daniel's car, my sensible shoes making little sound on the damp pavement. He didn't notice me until I tapped gently on the window. He startled, then quickly lowered the glass. "Mom, I wanted to talk to you. Without Vanessa." "Come inside," I offered. "I'll make tea." In the kitchen, the familiar ritual of filling the kettle, warming the pot, measuring leaves gave us both time to collect our thoughts. Daniel sat at the table, turning his keys in his hand, that old nervous habit that spoke volumes. When I placed a steaming cup before him, he looked up, his expression troubled. "Vanessa is furious. I don't know what to do." I took my seat across from him, watching the steam rise from my own cup. "I hear you. She says you embarrassed us. She says you don't trust family. She says I need to protect our future." His voice caught slightly on the last word. I waited, counting to 5 silently before responding. "I'm protecting mine, and in time that protects yours as well." He rubbed his brow, a gesture so like Harold's that it caught at my heart. "She won't let it go unless you sign something. Anything." "I won't." He stared at the spoon between us as if it might offer some solution I couldn't. "Why does this feel like war? Because peace built on surrender is not peace. You worry about losing face. I worry about losing myself." I met his gaze directly. Losing face can be repaired. Losing myself cannot. Something shifted in Daniel's eyes then, not anger, but a dawning recognition, the terror of a boy who has just learned the difference between wanting calm and being brave. "She says I'm weak if I don't make this happen." The admission cost him each word dragging from his throat. "You are not weak for refusing harm," I said gently. "You are only weak if you know a thing is wrong and do it anyway." He exhaled long and low, his shoulders slumping as if under an invisible weight. "What should I tell her?" "Tell her the boundary is firm. Tell her I have counsel. Tell her love without consent is control by another name." He nodded, then winced, pressing his lips together as if to hold back words he wasn't ready to speak. "She will leave if I don't deliver. Then you will face loss honestly, not by stealing safety from your mother." He flinched at the bluntness of my response. Then tentatively, he reached for my hand, stopping halfway across the table. I wanted to be the son who made everything smooth. "You can still be the son who tells the truth," I offered. "That is smoother in the long run." He swallowed hard, his eyes searching mine. "Are you angry with me?" "I am clear," I corrected. "Clarity can feel like anger when you're used to fog." A thin smile ghosted across his face. "You always talk like the weather." "It's how I survived storms." We walked to the door together, the silence between us no longer strained, but thoughtful. He hesitated on the threshold. "Can I come by tomorrow if things are bad?" "You can come by tomorrow if things are good," I countered. "Either way you knock." He nodded, his shoulders heavier, but his spine a touch straighter as he walked to his car. I watched until he turned the corner, then returned to the kitchen where the teacups still waited half empty and cooling. The house seemed to breathe around me, settling into the approaching evening with quiet dignity. On the chair by the window, Harold's plaid shirt lay where I'd left it that morning. I touched the worn cuff, hearing his voice in my memory. "Hold your line. Speak in full sentences. Do not rush mercy." In the window's reflection, I caught a glimpse of my own face, not hardened by confrontation, but whole in a way that felt new. My victory today hadn't been loud or dramatic. It had been in the steadiness of my voice, the clarity of my boundaries, the refusal to be diminished. I carried the cups to the sink and washed them slowly, watching the light change as the sun slipped lower. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Carl had scheduled appointments at the county recorder's office, the bank, my doctor's office. More signatures, more seals, more official recognition of my right to remain the author of my own life. But tonight, in this quiet kitchen, where memories of Harold lingered in every corner, I felt a peace that went beyond the absence of conflict. It was the peace that comes from standing firmly on ground you know is yours, from choosing silence, when it serves you, and speech, when it matters most. I dried my hands and walked to the back porch, settling onto the bench Harold had built beside the rose garden. The evening air carried the scent of early blooms and damp earth. In the growing twilight, I spoke aloud to the garden, to the memory of the man who had tended it for decades. "You were right to keep our secret. You were right about everything. The armor fits Harold. It fits perfectly." Morning light streamed through the blinds, painting thin gold stripes across the dining room table, where I had spread my papers in neat piles. Today was the day for making official what I had declared at Carl's office, the boundaries that would protect not just my assets, but my dignity and autonomy. Carl would arrive at 9 to accompany me to the county recorder's office, then to the bank, and finally to my doctor's office. A full day of signatures and seals that would form a fortress around the life Harold and I had built. I dressed with care. A blue blouse, Harold had always liked comfortable walking shoes, a light cardigan against the spring chill. From the jewelry box on my dresser, I selected the small pearl earrings that had been his gift on our 30th anniversary. Not ostentatious, but elegant in their simplicity, like the life we had chosen to live. The brass key to the safe weighed in my pocket, its familiar contours a touchstone as I moved through my morning routine. Tea steeping in the pot toast with a thin layer of marmalade, the newspaper unfolded, but barely read. My mind was too full of the tasks ahead, of the significance of this day in securing my future. Clara had offered to join us, but I'd declined. This journey was one I needed to make with just Carl, my legal shield, beside me. Clara understood, promising instead to keep watch over the house while I was gone. "Just in case," she'd said, leaving the possibilities unnamed but understood between us. Carl arrived precisely at 9, his silver sedan pulling into the driveway as I rinsed my teacup. He carried his briefcase and wore a tie, small gestures that acknowledged the formality of our mission. "Ready for this?" He studied my face as I locked the front door. "More than ready," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I've been preparing for this day since Harold pressed that key into my hand." The county recorder's office occupied the first floor of a utilitarian government building downtown. The lobby smelled of rubber mats and paper, an institutional scent that seemed unchanged since Harold and I had recorded our original deed decades ago. We took a number and waited among others clutching their own pieces of paper, lives distilled into legal language relationships defined by property lines and signatures. When our number was called, we approached a counter, where a clerk with tired eyes and a patient smile reviewed the documents Carl presented. A transfer deed putting the house firmly in the trust's name, a memorandum confirming the trust's ownership, forms that established the linkage between these physical assets and the legal structure Harold had created to protect me. The clerk scanned each page carefully, placed them on a pad, and stamped them with a square red seal. The sound, thud lift thud, satisfied something deep within me. Not theatrical, but official. Final. "Recorded," she said, simply sliding a receipt under the glass. I thanked her, tucking the receipt into my purse, as if it were far more precious than the small slip of paper it appeared to be. In many ways it was. This record meant that no matter what pressures Vanessa might apply to Daniel, no matter what legal maneuvers they might attempt, the house would remain under my control. At the bank, the manager led us into a small room with frosted glass walls. Mr. Phillips had known Harold and me for years, had helped us open our first joint account when we were newlyweds. "Mrs. Whitmore, what can we do for you today?" His manner was respectful, professional, but tinged with genuine concern. Carl explained the situation in careful, neutral terms. The need to enhance security on all accounts, to add verbal passwords to ensure that any changes would require in-person verification with 2 bank employees present. He didn't mention Daniel or Vanessa by name, but the implications were clear. Mr. Phillips nodded, his expression grave. "We've seen similar situations before. Unfortunately, elder financial abuse is more common than many realize." The phrase stung. Elder financial abuse, applying clinical terminology to what was at its core a betrayal by family. But I swallowed my discomfort, recognizing the importance of naming the threat correctly. We updated security questions, established voice passwords that would be required for any telephone inquiries, and added notes to all accounts, flagging them for enhanced verification procedures. Mr. Phillips printed a summary of these changes and asked if I would like to consider a safe deposit box. Yes, I decided. That would be prudent. He handed me a slender key for the box, another small weight to carry another layer of protection. I liked its decisive heft in my palm, the way it represented both access and barrier, opening only to the right person with the right authorization. Our final stop was my doctor's office, where Dr. Patel had been my physician since Harold's heart attack 10 years earlier. She knew my medical history intimately, had guided me through Harold's illness and my own grief afterward. The receptionist scanned my updated healthcare proxy and HIPAA release forms, verifying Clara's contact information as my first call in case of emergency, with Daniel remaining as the second. "If the day comes," the receptionist assured me, "we'll call who you've asked us to call." Another red stamp, another official thud, marking my choices as valid and binding. I exhaled, feeling a tension I hadn't fully acknowledged begin to release. Back in Carl's car, we sat for a moment in silence, the folder of completed documents resting between us like a bridge newly constructed. "You did everything right today," Carl said, pouring coffee from his thermos and offering me a cup. "People often confuse loud with strong. What you did today is strong." I accepted the cup, warming my hands around it as I considered his words. The strength he referred to wasn't in dramatic confrontations or heated arguments. It was in these methodical steps, these careful signatures, these official seals that now formed an invisible barrier around my life and choices. "Harold would be proud," Carl added. "He always said you were the truly strong one, you know. He just provided the framework." The comment surprised me. Harold had never been one for explicit compliments, expressing his regard through actions rather than words. The idea that he had spoken of my strength to others touched something deep within me. "Thank you for telling me that," I said simply. We drove back through midday traffic, the city bustling around us, oblivious to the small victory contained in the folder on my lap. Lives continued. People hurried to lunch appointments, delivery trucks double-parked, a street musician played saxophone on a corner. None of them would ever know that a woman had just secured her future with ink and patience. At home, I placed the folder of documents on the dining room table, resting my hand on it briefly. Then I called Clara to report our success. "The fortress is built," I told her. "Everything recorded and official." "Good. Now let's hope they respect walls when they couldn't respect words." After hanging up, I changed into more comfortable clothes and made a fresh pot of tea. The house felt different somehow, not physically altered but more securely mine. Each object, each corner held memories that were protected, now enshrined in legal language and official seals. The afternoon passed quietly. I tended to the roses, weeding around their bases and checking for aphids. Harold had been meticulous about garden pests, inspecting each cane with careful attention. I tried to maintain his standards, though I lacked his patient eye for detail. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the yard, I noticed a car slowing in front of the house. Not Daniel's sedan or Vanessa's SUV, but a black luxury car I didn't recognize. It parked, and Andrew Pike emerged alone, straightening his tie as he approached my front door. I met him there before he could ring the bell, opening the door, but not stepping aside to invite him in. "Mr. Pike, this is unexpected." He smiled, professional charm firmly in place. "Mrs. Whitmore, I apologize for coming unannounced, but I felt we should speak privately, attorney to client." "I'm not your client, Mr. Pike, and my boundary card was quite clear. All communications through my counsel." He had the grace to look momentarily abashed. "Of course, and I respect that completely. However, I thought you might appreciate hearing directly about some developments that impact your family." Family. The word hung between us, a lever he hoped would pry open the door I was keeping firmly shut. "Whatever you need to share can be communicated through Carl Jensen." My voice remained calm, but my hand tightened on the doorframe. "Vanessa and Daniel are experiencing some financial difficulties." He pressed on, ignoring my redirection. "Nothing catastrophic, but pressing. The wedding expenses exceeded their budget, and there are some outstanding debts that need resolution. They're concerned about their credit rating, their ability to eventually buy a home." I thought of what Clara had shared. Bounced checks, deferred loans, landlords demanding certified funds. Pressing seemed a considerable understatement. "I'm sorry to hear that. However, their financial management is their responsibility, not mine." Andrew shifted his weight, his expression softening into practiced concern. "Mrs. Whitmore, no one is suggesting you're responsible for their decisions, but families help each other through difficult times, a short-term loan perhaps, or access to a line of credit, something to bridge them through this temporary setback." The truth emerged at last. Not power of attorney for my protection, but access to funds for their convenience. Not concern for my well-being, but a solution to their financial desperation. "Mr. Pike, I'll say this one more time. Any communications regarding my finances or legal affairs must go through my attorney. If Daniel and Vanessa wish to discuss a loan, they can do so directly with me, without intermediaries or legal documents disguised as protection." His smile tightened. "I understand your position, but consider how this stance affects your relationship with your son. Family harmony sometimes requires flexibility, and respect sometimes requires boundaries," I countered. "Good afternoon, Mr. Pike." I closed the door firmly but not angrily, then watched through the window as he returned to his car phone already at his ear. Reporting failure, no doubt, planning the next approach. I called Carl immediately to report the visit, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "He's overstepped significantly," Carl said, his usual calm tone edged with anger. Coming to your home after explicit instructions to communicate through counsel is inappropriate at best, potentially harassing at worst. I'll address this directly with him." After we hung up, I sat in Harold's chair in the living room processing the encounter. Andrew's visit had revealed what I'd suspected, but hadn't confirmed until now. Vanessa and Daniel weren't concerned about my welfare. They were desperate for access to what they assumed were my modest savings. What would they do if they discovered the truth? If they learned that what they sought was not thousands but millions? The thought sent a chill through me, despite the warm spring evening. I made dinner mechanically, a simple soup bread warmed in the oven, and ate at the kitchen table where so many family meals had taken place over the decades. Daniel in his high chair, then a booster seat, then towering over the table as a teenager with an endless appetite. Harold at the head, quietly presiding over our small domestic domain. The memory of those meals that family unity brought an ache I hadn't expected. For all my determination to protect myself, I hadn't fully acknowledged the grief of this fracture with Daniel, the possibility that our relationship might never recover its former closeness. The phone rang as I was washing my dinner dishes. Daniel's number flashed on the screen. I dried my hands slowly before answering, preparing myself for whatever might come. "Mom, I just found out Andrew went to see you today. I swear I didn't know he was planning that." The strain in his voice sounded genuine. I could picture him pacing, running his hand through his hair as he always did when upset. "I believe you," I said, and found that I did. Daniel had never been a good liar. His face always betrayed him, even as a child attempting to conceal a broken window or a poor test score. "Vanessa she's not handling things well. The wedding cost more than we planned, and there are some bills coming due. She thought—" He trailed off, the admission clearly difficult. "She thought I might be an easy solution." I finished for him. His silence confirmed it. "Daniel, if you needed financial help, why didn't you simply ask me directly? Why this elaborate scheme to gain control over my assets?" "I didn't know that's what she was doing. Not at first," he said quickly. "She presented it as protection for you, planning for the future. By the time I realized there were more immediate concerns driving it—" He paused. "I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry." The apology, incomplete as it was, felt like the first honest exchange we'd had since before the wedding. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "But we need to be clear about something. I won't sign power of attorney documents. I won't grant blanket access to my accounts. If you need financial assistance, we can discuss a specific loan with clear terms." Another pause. "Vanessa won't like that. She says loans between family members create bad feelings. And sneaking control of someone's finances doesn't—" The words came out sharper than I intended. "You're right," he admitted. "I know you're right. I don't know what to do. She's talking about moving back in with her mother if we can't solve this." The threat was transparent, emotional leverage to pressure him, and by extension, me. I thought of what Clara had reported about Marjorie's words. "Daniel is kind but soft. You are steering this." "Daniel, I can't tell you how to manage your marriage, but I can tell you that surrendering to manipulation rarely leads to respect. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is maintain a boundary." He didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter. "I need to think about a lot of things. Take the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." After we hung up, I walked through the quiet house, touching familiar objects as if to reassure myself of their solidity. In the bedroom, Harold's shirt still hung in the closet. His reading glasses still rested on the nightstand. I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted by the day's events, the emotional weight of confrontation and resolution. From the drawer of the nightstand, I took out the letter Harold had left me, the one explaining the trust and the fortune he'd built so quietly. I read it again, though I knew every word by heart, seeking guidance from his practical wisdom. "If you say nothing, you will see who speaks for you." He had been right. Silence had revealed intentions more clearly than any direct questioning could have done. The rush for power of attorney Andrew's unannounced visit, Vanessa's thinly veiled desperation, all exposed by my simple refusal to comply. I slept fitfully that night, waking several times to strange dreams of locked doors and missing keys. By dawn, I had abandoned any pretense of rest and made my way to the kitchen for early tea, watching the garden emerge from darkness as first light touched the roses. The doorbell rang at 9, startlingly loud in the morning quiet. Through the peephole, I saw Vanessa standing alone on the porch, immaculately dressed in a cream suit that looked new and expensive. Another statement purchase, I suspected another debt added to the pile. I opened the door but remained in the threshold, neither inviting her in nor stepping onto the porch. "Vanessa, this is unexpected." She smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "Diane, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I thought we should talk, just the two of us, woman to woman." The phrase struck me as calculated, an attempt to establish false intimacy. "I'm preparing to leave for an appointment. Perhaps another time. This will only take a moment." She shifted her designer handbag to her other arm, a nervous gesture at odds with her polished appearance. "I want to apologize for how things have developed. There's been a misunderstanding." "Has there—" I kept my voice neutral, waiting. "Daniel and I never intended to upset you. We genuinely want what's best for everyone." She paused, seeming to choose her next words carefully. "Family means everything to me, Diane. I lost my father young, and I know how precious these relationships are. The last thing I want is tension between us." The performance was skillful. The reference to her loss, the emphasis on family, the positioning of herself as peacemaker. But I had seen through this facade, now understood the calculation behind it. "I appreciate your concern for family harmony," I said evenly. "What specifically did you want to discuss today?" Her smile flickered briefly before stabilizing. "Daniel is struggling with this situation. He feels caught between his wife and his mother. I hate seeing him torn apart like this." The implication was clear. I was the unreasonable party, the obstacle to family peace. I let the accusation pass without challenge, waiting for her to reveal her true purpose. "We have a proposal that might resolve things amicably," she continued. "A compromise that respects your independence while giving us all peace of mind." "I'm listening." "Instead of full power of attorney, perhaps you could add Daniel as a joint holder on your primary accounts, just as a precaution so he could help with bills or emergencies if needed." Her tone remained light, reasonable. "You'd maintain full access and control, of course. It's just a safety net." A safety net, or a direct line to whatever funds they could access. Joint accounts would give them immediate access without any of the oversight or protection of properly executed legal documents. "That's an interesting suggestion," I said, watching her carefully. "Out of curiosity, which accounts were you thinking should be joint?" "Your primary checking and savings, perhaps your investment account if you have one." She waved a hand casually, as if the specifics were unimportant details. "Just the main ones where your Social Security and pension go." I noted the fishing expedition, her uncertainty about exactly what accounts I maintained, what income sources I had. She was still probing, still searching for the full picture of my finances. "Vanessa, I've made my position clear. I'm not making changes to my accounts or legal arrangements at this time. If there's a specific financial concern you and Daniel are facing, we can discuss that directly." Her composure slipped for just a moment, frustration flashing across her face before she regained control. "This isn't about our finances, Diane. It's about family unity, about trust." "I agree that trust is essential," I said. "Trust that my boundaries will be respected. Trust that my competence won't be questioned. Trust that concerns about my welfare will be expressed honestly, not as a pretext for other agendas." She stiffened, the pretense of warm familiarity evaporating. "You think I have an agenda? I'm trying to help our family function smoothly." "I think we have different definitions of help and different priorities for family functioning," I replied calmly. "And I think my appointment time is approaching, so I'll need to prepare now." Her hand tightened on her handbag knuckles, whitening briefly. "Daniel will be disappointed that we couldn't find common ground. Please tell him he's welcome to visit any time, alone." The pointed addition landed exactly as intended. Vanessa's smile became rigid, a mask barely concealing anger. "Of course. I wouldn't want to impose where I'm not welcomed as family." She turned to leave, then paused. You know, Diane, isolation isn't healthy for someone your age. Pushing away those who care about you can lead to cognitive decline. Daniel and I have been researching the warning signs. The threat was thinly veiled, a hint at their next potential strategy. Question my competence, suggest cognitive impairment, perhaps even seek guardianship. I felt a chill despite the warm spring morning. How thoughtful of you both to be so concerned, I said, my voice steady. I'll be sure to mention your research to Dr. Patel at my next checkup. She's been monitoring my cognitive function quite thoroughly. Vanessa departed without another word, her heels clicking sharply down the walkway. Through the window, I watched her slide into her car, immediately pulling out her phone, reporting failure, strategizing next steps. The pattern was becoming familiar. I called Clara immediately, explaining Vanessa's visit and the veiled threat about cognitive decline. So they're shifting tactics, Clara said, unsurprised. They couldn't get you to sign willingly, so now they'll try to suggest you're not capable of deciding at all. Classic playbook. Should I be concerned? I asked, a flutter of anxiety rising despite my outward calm. Concerned, yes. Afraid, no. You've done everything right. Updated medical directives, regular checkups, documented springing power of attorney that requires 2 independent physicians. They'd have a steep hill to climb trying to override all that. Her practical assessment helped settle my nerves. Still, I should be prepared. Absolutely. I'll start keeping a log of these visits, these concerns they're suddenly expressing. Documentation is our friend. After hanging up, I made tea and carried it to the back porch, needing the steadying influence of Harold's garden. The roses were beginning to form buds, tight green promises of the blooms to come. The fence he had mended each spring leaned slightly in one section, needing attention I hadn't yet given it. Sitting on the bench he had built, I sipped my tea and considered what Carl had called my fortress. The legal protections now firmly in place. They were substantial, well-crafted, as solid as anything made by human hands could be. But fortresses can still be besieged, their defenses tested by determined attackers. The thought of Vanessa and possibly Daniel researching warning signs of cognitive decline, perhaps planning to challenge my competence, sent a thread of fear through me. Not for my assets, those were securely protected by the trust, but for my autonomy, my right to live as I chose in the home Harold and I had shared. The ringing phone interrupted my thoughts. It was Carl. Diane, I've been speaking with colleagues who specialize in elder law. Given what's transpired, they recommend we take some additional precautions. He outlined a plan. Regular cognitive assessments, documented by Dr. Patel, a video record of me clearly stating my wishes, and demonstrating my capacity affidavits from neighbors and friends attesting to my continued competence. It may seem excessive, he acknowledged, but if they're considering challenging your capacity, we want to be thoroughly prepared. I'll do whatever you recommend, I agreed. Better to have protections we don't need than to need protections we don't have. After arranging appointments for these additional measures, I returned to the garden. The physical labor of weeding and pruning provided a welcome distraction from my churning thoughts. I lost track of time, focused entirely on clearing the base of each rose bush, checking for disease or pests, adjusting supports where needed. You've got your father's touch with those roses. The voice startled me. Daniel stood at the garden gate watching me work. He looked tired, rumpled, as if he hadn't slept well. I try, I said, straightening slowly. Though he was always more patient with them than I am. Daniel entered the garden hesitantly, like someone approaching consecrated ground. I remember how he used to talk to them. I thought it was funny when I was a kid. He believed plants respond to the human voice. I smiled at the memory. Maybe he was right. They certainly thrived under his care. We stood in awkward silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. Finally, Daniel spoke. Vanessa told me about her visit this morning. Did she tell you everything? I kept my tone neutral, curious about how much she had shared. He looked away, studying the rose canes, as if they held some answer I couldn't see. She said you refused to consider any compromise, that you implied she was after your money. That's not quite accurate, I corrected gently. I refused to add her or you as joint holders on my accounts without proper legal protections. There's a difference. Daniel nodded slowly. There is, isn't there? He paused, seeming to gather courage. Mom, I found something on Vanessa's computer. She left it open when she went to take a shower. The hesitation in his voice signaled the weight of what he was about to share. I waited, letting him find his way to the words. She's been researching how to challenge someone's competency, how to document signs of confusion or inability to make sound decisions. She has a folder of links to websites about guardianship proceedings, about having elderly parents declared incompetent. His voice grew strained. She's been keeping notes about you. Times you've repeated yourself in conversation, moments when you couldn't immediately recall a name or date. Normal things everyone does, but she's cataloging them. The confirmation of my fears should have shaken me, but somehow hearing it spoken aloud brought clarity rather than panic. This was the next phase of their strategy laid bare. "Thank you for telling me," I said simply. "That couldn't have been easy." He looked at me directly for the first time since entering the garden. "I'm ashamed, Mom. Not just that she's doing this, but that I've been too weak to stop it. That I let things get this far." The confession cost him. I could see it in the slump of his shoulders, the redness rimming his eyes. My anger, which had been building beneath the surface, began to dissolve in the face of his genuine remorse. "Why, Daniel, help me understand how we got here." He sank onto the garden bench, elbows on knees, head bowed. "The wedding was more than we could afford, way more. Marjorie insisted on certain venues, certain vendors. Vanessa didn't want to disappoint her. I didn't want to disappoint Vanessa. We put everything on credit cards, took out personal loans. And now those bills are coming due." I finished for him. He nodded miserably. "Vanessa thought, she assumed you must have some savings from Dad's insurance, maybe the house equity. She thought it would be a simple solution. Then when you resisted, she got fixated, like she couldn't accept that this avenue was closed." The picture became clearer. Desperation fueling determination, financial panic driving increasingly unethical strategies. Not evil, perhaps, as I had first suspected, but weakness and opportunism combining in a dangerous mix. "What are you going to do now?" I asked gently. Daniel looked up, his expression more resolved than I had seen since before the wedding. "I told her this morning that I wouldn't support any attempt to challenge your competency, that it was wrong legally and morally. We had a huge fight." He swallowed hard. "I'm staying at a friend's place for now. I needed space to think." The admission hung between us, not quite a separation, but a crack in the foundation of his marriage, a line drawn that might or might not be crossed again. "I'm sorry it's come to this," I said, and meant it. Whatever my feelings about Vanessa, I had never wished for my son's unhappiness. "I am too." He straightened slightly. "But I'm not sorry I finally spoke up. Dad always said that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right, even when you're afraid." The echo of Harold's wisdom in our son's voice brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Perhaps something of his father's strength had taken root after all dormant, until this moment of crisis forced its growth. We sat together in the garden as afternoon light softened around us, talking more openly than we had in months. Daniel shared the full extent of their financial troubles, the maxed credit cards, the personal loans with aggressive interest rates, the looming student loan payments Vanessa had deferred during graduate school. "We'll have to sell the car, maybe move to a smaller apartment," he concluded. "Start over with a strict budget. It won't be easy, but it's the right thing to do." "Would you consider letting me help?" I offered carefully. "Not with blanket access to accounts, but perhaps a specific loan with clear terms." He shook his head firmly. "No, not now. Maybe someday when we've proven we can manage responsibly on our own. But right now, we need to face the consequences of our choices." The maturity in his response surprised and moved me. This was the son I remembered. Thoughtful, principled, willing to accept responsibility rather than seeking the easy path. As evening approached, Daniel stood to leave. "I should go. Vanessa's been texting nonstop." "What will you tell her?" "The truth. That I won't be part of any attempt to challenge your competence. That we need to solve our financial problems honestly, not by trying to access your assets." At the garden gate, he turned back. "Mom, I am sorry. For all of this. For not standing up sooner." "I know," I said. "And Daniel, your father would be proud of you today." The words seemed to straighten his spine, square his shoulders as he walked to his car. I watched until he turned the corner, then returned to the kitchen to prepare a simple dinner, my heart lighter than it had been in weeks. 3 days later, Clara brought news that Daniel had moved most of his belongings to his friend's apartment. She had seen him and Vanessa in a tense exchange outside their home boxes stacked in his car. Vanessa had been crying, but there was anger in her posture, not grief. The separation I had sensed coming had materialized. The following Tuesday, Daniel called to say he was filing for divorce. "It wasn't just this," he explained. "The financial deception, the manipulation. It was all part of a pattern I'd been ignoring. When I finally stood up to her about trying to declare you incompetent, everything else became clear too." I didn't offer empty consolations. Instead, I said what I believed to be true. Difficult choices are rarely regretted when they're made from principle rather than fear. "I keep thinking about what you said," he replied, "about peace not being the same as obedience. I was trying to keep peace by obeying, and all it did was make me lose myself." The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm. Daniel found a small apartment closer to his work and began the process of untangling his finances from Vanessa's. He came by for dinner once a week, sometimes helping with projects around the house. One weekend, he fixed the leaning section of the garden fence, working quietly and methodically the way Harold had taught him. Meanwhile, Clara had been thinking. One Sunday after church service, she introduced me to Ruth, who coordinated the community programs. "Diane has a wealth of financial knowledge," Clara told her, "and recent experience protecting herself from financial manipulation. She might be perfect for that new program you were talking about." Ruth's eyes lit up. "The Women's Financial Literacy Initiative. We're especially looking for someone who can connect with older women. Many are widows managing money for the first time, often facing pressure from well-meaning or not-so-well-meaning family members." The suggestion caught me by surprise. "You think I should volunteer?" "Why not?" Clara challenged. "You managed a hardware store's books for decades. You've lived within your means while building security, and now you've successfully protected yourself from financial manipulation. Those are valuable skills to share." The idea took root immediately, using my experience to help other women, particularly older ones, who might face similar pressures from family or predatory advisors. Not broadcasting my hidden wealth, of course, but sharing the principles that had guided Harold's and my financial decisions throughout our marriage. I'd like that, I decided. Very much. As Ruth outlined the program details, I noticed Bernice and Altha, 2 other women around my age, listening with interest. They joined our conversation, sharing their own experiences with financial independence after losing spouses. "My nephew tried that after Charlie died," Bernice confided. "Cried about scammers, said he would protect me, asked for a spare key. I gave him a copy of my will and a ride home instead." Ruth smiled. "My daughter wanted me to move in. I told her I would come for Thanksgiving and leave with my dignity." Altha opened her purse and showed me a small notebook with 3 lines written inside. "No" on the doorstep. "No by phone. Yes, only with a witness. Paper is how quiet people speak in loud rooms," Ruth said, noticing my interest in Altha's notebook. "You did the brave thing in standing your ground." Bernice tilted her head light, catching the diamond on her finger. "Shiny means nothing without a clasp. You kept yours closed." Something shifted behind my ribs. Not relief exactly, but recognition. These women understood without lengthy explanation. They had faced their own versions of what I was experiencing, had developed their own strategies for maintaining dignity and autonomy in the face of pressure. "You see," Clara whispered, witnessing this moment of connection, "you are not alone." I looked at the circle of women and felt the truth settle comfortably around me. A chorus can sustain a note that a soloist cannot hold forever. I had been singing alone, but harmony was possible. The months that followed brought healing and new purpose. I volunteered twice a week at the church, helping organize materials for the financial literacy program, and eventually leading small group discussions. Dr. Patel documented my excellent cognitive function during my annual physical. Daniel's divorce proceedings moved forward, painful but necessary. One afternoon in late summer, I sat with Carl in his office, reviewing some minor updates to my estate plan. "I've been thinking," I said, "about the trust Harold established." Carl looked up attentive. "What about it?" "I'd like to establish a foundation, something focused on financial education for women, especially older women facing transitions. Nothing with my name on it. Anonymous giving is more my style. But something that would extend beyond what I can do personally at the church." Carl nodded, unsurprised. "Harold always said you had a gift for seeing where help was most needed. He'd love this idea." "Would $5 million be enough to start, to make a meaningful difference?" His eyebrows rose slightly. "More than enough. We could establish an endowment that would fund programs indefinitely." "Then let's do it. Draft whatever we need." As I left Carl's office that day, I felt a new dimension of the peace I'd been building since standing my ground with Vanessa. Not just the safety that comes from protected boundaries, but the satisfaction of extending those protections to others. On a warm afternoon in early fall, I sat on the bench in Harold's garden, watching bees navigate between the late roses. The fence stood straight and strong, now mended by Daniel's careful hands. The blooms had been exceptional this year, as if celebrating our reclaimed peace. Clara joined me, bringing iced tea in glasses that sweated in the unexpected heat. "How are you feeling about everything? It's been quite a journey these past few months." I considered the question carefully. "I feel reclaimed, as if I've recovered something of myself that was slipping away without my noticing." "That's a good word for it." Clara nodded. "Reclamation. Taking back what's rightfully yours, not just assets but dignity, voice, agency." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the light shift through rose canes and maple leaves. The quiet felt different now, not the silence of someone who has been silenced, but the calm of someone who knows when to speak and when to listen. "You know," Clara said eventually, "what you've done these past months isn't just for you. It's for every woman who's been patted on the head and told not to worry her pretty little mind about finances. It's for every widow who's been seen as a resource rather than a person. It's a victory with ripples." I hadn't thought of it that way, as something larger than my personal boundary setting. But Clara was right. Each woman who stood her ground made it a little easier for the next one to do the same. As evening approached, I walked Clara to her door, then returned to my porch. The light had turned golden, casting long shadows across Harold's garden. I sat on the steps, feeling the day's warmth radiating from the concrete. In my pocket, the brass key to the safe pressed against my hip, a familiar weight I had come to find comforting rather than burdensome. I thought about the blue folder inside Harold's letter with its careful instructions and profound trust in my judgment. This is armor, not bragging. He had been right about that. The money itself wasn't the victory. It was the choice, the ability to say yes when I wanted to and no when I needed to. The power to help others on my terms, not from obligation or manipulation. I spoke aloud to the garden, to the memory of the man who had tended it for decades. "I am all right now, Harold. The armor you left fits. The house is signed and sealed, steady as a good fence. Our son is learning where courage begins. I will keep the porch light on." The breeze lifted slightly, carrying the scent of roses beginning to bloom. I breathed deeply and let the moment settle around me like a comfortable shawl. Not a dramatic ending, not a triumphant conclusion, but something quieter and more lasting. The peace that comes from knowing exactly where you stand and what you're worth. I stood and walked to the garden, touching the petals of a half-opened rose with gentle fingers. Then I watered each bush carefully the way Harold had taught me, close to the roots with patience and attention to each individual plant. The simple ritual felt like both closure and continuation, an acknowledgement that life moves forward even as it honors what came before. The greatest victory I had learned wasn't in dramatic confrontation or elaborate revenge. It was in this, in watering roses as evening fell, in mending what could be mended, in standing firmly on ground that was mine by right and choice. In knowing that silence can be bright when it is honest, and boundaries can be loving when they are clear.